The Final Stronghold, written by Martin Hicks, narrated by Tony Robinson. Prologue. Aside from seeming to be somewhat busier than it had previously been, and being shrouded in a downpour of torrential rain, it being June and monsoon season, the Hooghly River in its final approaches to Calcutta presented a familiar sight to Acting Commander James Rutherford. The river pilot had taken charge of his ship, the auxiliary steam gunboat Spartan, off Samar, where the river emptied into the Bay of Bengal. He manoeuvred it upstream, past the successive bends and landmarks that measured its progress from the bay to the city, with Rutherford doing little more than observing the process. Busier indeed, he confirmed to himself, as, clad in his canvas coat, he stood on the ship's raised pilot platform just forward of the funnel, in the company of the formerly clad pilot and Spartan's sailing master, Thomas Crossley. Outwardly, he affected an air of little more than casual interest, though in actual fact he continued to closely scrutinize the ship's progress as it made its mid-channel way upstream. The previous year, Spartan's departure from Calcutta had been marked by an attempt by another man, who had presented himself as a river pilot, to ground the ship on one of the estuary's mudbanks. And while the current pilot had thus far displayed no such inclinations, Rutherford remained reluctant to leave him entirely unsupervised in the carrying out of his business. Once bitten, twice shy, the words of the old proverb turned over repeatedly in his mind, as the river ascent drew towards its end, with the hairpin bend at Buita Point now in sight, the negotiation of which would bring the city itself into view, while the downpour finally began to slacken. The return to Calcutta would, in all likelihood, mark the conclusion of the ship's mission, resulting in the paying off of her company of officers and men. They would then be assigned to other ships or duties, with the possible temporary exception of a skeleton crew of warrant officers and hands, and most likely First Lieutenant Charles Jordan, who was currently in his place on the quarterdeck. These would be required to oversee whatever repairs were authorized for the ship before making their departures, but, barring something unforeseen, they too would in due course embark upon other assignments. Spartan could then be given a further role, or perhaps be placed in reserve. It might even be her fate to be discarded for disposal. Whichever of these eventually came to pass, it would mark the final end of the chapter of events that had seen her departure from this very river 15 months previously, to commence the pursuit of arch-pirate Liang Ziu, known as the Scorpion. That mission had been concluded with his death the previous month. Rutherford, despite being well accustomed to the transients of sea-going commissions, felt a degree of regret at Spartan's prospects. It had been a successful cruise with an enthusiastic, if initially inexperienced wardroom, though a well-enough seasoned crew, a considerable proportion of whom had been volunteers. Company practices would prevail, however, and all aboard, including Rutherford himself, would, over the coming days, depart from the ship for the final time and go their various ways. Chapter 1. Poulsen. Spartan had lain at anchor for almost 2 days off Calcutta, in spite of the fact that Rutherford had promptly sent ashore a dispatch announcing her arrival and the completion
Sample complete. Ready to continue?